You're watching the Chucktown Wind Report Extended Weekday Outlook from Tuesday, November the 10th through Friday, November the 13th. Okay, we've had a sticky situation with the frontal boundary stalled along our coastline for the last couple of days. The high pressure that was firmly built to our north, driving down those strong northeasterly winds, has flattened and is pushing out into the Atlantic Ocean now, so no more of those strong northerlies, at least for a while. This frontal boundary that's been pulling up plenty of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico will be sliding to the east as high pressure builds in from the west. What that's going to do is our newly formed tropical storm Kate is moving to the north at 17 miles an hour. This frontal boundary is going to pull this storm away to the northeast. So the system is currently packing 60-mile-an-hour winds. The forecast is for it to intensify over time, even becoming a Category 1 hurricane somewhere out here over the Atlantic Ocean, and sort of what we call bombing out in meteorology, or bombogenesis, where it maxes out in vorticity and then eventually the vorticity stops, but it retains some intensification up into the higher levels for a bit before weakening as it goes extratropical. So with that said, this storm is not going to be a threat to land. It may provide some swell along the coastline the next couple of days as it drifts away to the north and to the northeast. Alright, so the high pressure is going to be building in a west-northwesterly flow behind this boundary today. We're expecting a 9 to 13 knot flow to the open areas. Now, we could see a slightly enhanced gradient build that wind. We could see some surges to about 14 to 18 knots along the open areas, such as the Ashley River and the Charleston Harbor. So that's not out of the question, as a little bit of cooler air advects over those warmer waters and the open spots. That's where you're going to see your higher winds today, maybe even down the ICW. It just depends on on the high tide. The higher the tides, the more that wind is going to advect over those waters. So tides do have a little bit to do with it because it provides more of a flat surface for the winds to settle down over. So over time, as this high pressure eases to the east, we may even see another lobe of high pressure develop here to the north, and mainly this is going to be an Appalachian ridge, and we're going to see northerly flow tomorrow morning when we wake up, and that will fade as a mild sea breeze comes into the coastline. Now, usually when these winds fade below about 5 or 6 knots from these northwesterly or northerly flows, we see the land interaction with warmer land radiating and the cooler waters where they meet. We get a mild sea breeze by default, as a coastal ridge of high pressure usually develops along the, let's say, the eastern Georgia coast and up into the southern South Carolina area. We get a little bit of a heat flux there, and that develops a very mild sea breeze. So tomorrow is going to be a very weak day. So Wednesday we're not expecting very much. Most wind speeds will stay below 10 knots for the day. As we get into Thursday, that's where things get a little bit tricky. Right now we have a cold front that's draping down the Pacific, and with the warm Pacific waters, or what we know as El Nino, we're going to get another large warm injection of air into the southwest United States, and a large low pressure system is going to come together, and it's going to head towards the Great Lakes. So the upper air pattern for this supports this movement of this low pressure with all of its moisture spanning up into the Great Lakes. That will develop a cold front that will come across the United States, and as it taps into the Gulf, it always acquires more energy ahead of it. We'll get a southwesterly wind building ahead on Thursday for our area ahead of this cold front. So the builds for this are going to be dependent on how strong the cold front is and if it gains more energy as it taps into the Gulf. We usually depend on low-level jetting this time of the year because the cooler waters tend to show marine layering to keep the wind speeds capped in the very low teens to near 10 knots. So some of the models are jumping on 17 knots at this point, but I'm not sold on that just yet. I'm going to still call for about 10 to 14 knots on Thursday unless the air temperatures remain down near the water temperature level, which is about 70 to 71 degrees. It warmed up just a little bit, about 1 or 2 degrees. So for Thursday, we see south or south-southwest winds meet 10 to 14 beaches, and we could see 14 to 18 in the harbor. Without marine layering, we could see that higher build along the beaches meet some 13 to 17 knot values. So not out of the question. As we get into Friday, we see high pressure building in behind that frontal boundary, driving in across the lower half of the country and bringing in our first strong west or west-northwesterly winds in a very long time. So that's mainly due to the upper air pattern. We see the jet stream. Here's that warm injection going on right now in the upper atmosphere. Well, the warmer air mass is at the surface, but our upper air pattern supports this west-southwesterly flow as the subtropical jet pulls up into the United States from the south again. This is that time of the year when we have a struggle between a polar jet and subtropical jet, and that's how we have the term fall, where we have colder air trying to dive down from the north, struggling to meet the warm air to the south. And as time goes on, we get into the cooler months, the subtropical jet will recede to the south and the polar jet will win out. And that's how it is. So as we go in time, we see this subtropical jet moving across the eastern United States and then keeping us on the warm side. And we'll see some cool downs with some northerly winds, but for the most part, we're gonna remain a little bit on the warm side for this. And this is going to Thursday and even into Friday. We see the jet really peeling all the way from the Pacific across the southeast United States. So that's what's driving our air pattern. That's what's going to keep the high pressure coming in from the west across the southeast United States to keep that westerly flow going instead of the northerly flow, at least for the next 4 to 5 days. Okay, look at Tropical Storm Kate. Here is the track for this, heading off to the northeast and actually becoming a Category 1 hurricane sometime Wednesday night. And then as we get into Thursday morning, it starts to become extratropical and keeps heading off to the northeast. If we look at the GRE, here's radar for Charleston. We see some of the tail ends of the front, moving some rains, a couple lines of showers to our north, heading through Myrtle Beach. We see a little bit of moisture left to our southwest, and we could see some residual sprinkles or maybe a couple of drizzles here and there through this morning, and then I think we're going to dry out. If we look at the water vapor imagery, we can see this drier orange. The orange colors represent drier air and really pushing down to the southeast behind all of this activity. So that's why I think we're going to dry out and see some sunshine today finally and get out of this Seattle-like pattern that we've had for several days now. All right, if we look at infrared, let's take a look at Kate. And we can see a lot of the energy from Tropical Storm Kate. Winds are 60 miles an hour. Most of the energy is along the northwestern quadrant where this red wedge is, and the majority of the intensity of the storm is remaining to the eastern side, as this storm is going to be getting some shear from the south ahead of this cold front boundary and then heading off to the northeast, and we see it start to intensify over time. We see the stronger winds start to wrap around to about 3/4 of the system, and as time goes on, it looks like Kate grows a little bit and then becomes a hurricane. So here's our Cat 1 status at this point. I wanted to back up real quick. Let me see what the aircraft, the Hurricane Hunters Recon, this is a live update to show what they're doing. They're out in the storm right now making some passes, and it looks like we're seeing, let me pause it as it goes through the area. Okay, so this is where the plane is now, and then as it made some passes earlier, it looks like the surface pressure at this point is 997 millibars, so this storm is intensifying just a little bit. We could see those winds come up slightly today. So holding at 60 miles an hour now, but some of these millibar readings are showing 997, down about 6 millibars from the last reading at 4 o'clock a.m. So expecting a little bit of intensification from the storm. I think most models are in agreement with that, and they do support. So once again, recap for our area. Today, 9 to 13 knot west-northwesterly flow over the open areas. We could see some surges even go as high as 14 to 18 at times, especially during some of the heating, later morning heating and early afternoon, and then back down later as this high pressure moves to the east. Tomorrow morning when we wake up, light northerly winds fade below 5 to 6 knots. We see a mild southerly sea breeze meet 5 to 9 knots. Could see 10 knots in the harbor. As we get into Thursday, we see a south or southwesterly, could see southwesterly flow meet some 10 to 14 knots on the beaches, 14 to 18 knots in the harbor. Without marine layering, we could see some higher builds on the beaches, 13 to 17 knots. As we get into Friday, that cold front pushes offshore. We see high pressure coming across, very similar to this one, but stronger. We see a moderate west-northwest or westerly flow from that high pressure on Friday. Models are downplaying it. I could say 14 to 18 knots for that. And that will do it for the Chucktown Wind Report. Thanks for watching.